Welcome to the Touch MBA Admissions Podcast. Do you need help figuring out which schools to apply to or how to get into the world's top MBA programs? Hey, you're not alone. Join thousands of others on this podcast and on our site, touchmba.com, as they seek the admissions edge. And now, here's your host, Darren Joe.
What's up, guys? It's Darren. Welcome to the Touch MBA podcast. I hope you're doing well wherever you are in the world. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here with us on the show. This week, I brought on another former listener, and these are my favorite interviews because I feel like I have such a long history with this week's guest. He first came to our site back in September 2014 to get some free school selection help. And since then, I've seen him apply to top schools. He eventually got into IESE in Spain, where he went. And after he graduated, they actually hired him to be their director for their Center of Entrepreneurship and Innovation. So even though I've interacted much with Eddy over these 4 years, he generously volunteered to be the IESE ambassador on our forum, sharing his experience with the school there as well. This is the first time we actually spoke. It was really fun to catch up with him and walk through his journey. Why did he decide, as a more experienced candidate with about 10 years of experience and with a small family, why did he decide to leave Ohio and get his MBA in Spain? What was that experience like? What were the pros and cons of that experience? Then we also talk about MBAs and entrepreneurship. You know, can business schools really help you as an aspiring entrepreneur to launch your business? Is it worth it to get an MBA with the time and big tuition costs, right? If you're an aspiring entrepreneur, and how can business schools really help you? I really wanted to ask Eddy for his opinion on all these things. I hope you enjoy this conversation. It's a wide-ranging conversation. I just hope it gives some insights into what it's really like to get your MBA far from home and what you need to look out for. And if you need free school selection help, go to touchmba.com. We'd be happy to help you out there. We also have a lot of free guides. We have, for example, a guide on the top MBAs in Spain, where we compare, the top programs head to head, and show how and why they're different. So a lot of free guides at touchmba.com/guides. Go check that out. And let's get straight to this week's podcast. Here we go. Eddy Zakes came to us in September 2014 for school selection help, and since then has gone to IESE Business School in Spain and is now working in Barcelona. And we're going to learn all about his story. Eddy, thank you so much. It's been a long time coming. I can't believe we're actually talking to each other now after 4 years of email interactions, but I'm really excited to have you on the show, man.
Thank you very much, Darren. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you very much for having me and letting me tell my story. And yeah, like you said, I wouldn't be in the position that I'm in today, honestly, without Touch MBA. And I don't think that that's meant to be boosting your ego, but I definitely have a debt of gratitude to you and the work that you've done.
Oh, no, I appreciate it so much. I remember when you got into IESE and you wrote me, like, that positive comment from you really helped keep me going and keep the podcast going. When you said, it helped you with your school decision, I was like, oh, wow. Because sometimes I don't hear from listeners, so I'm not sure what effect we're having. Hopefully a very positive effect. But thank you for writing in those comments and what you just mentioned. Yeah. So Eddy, could you give us a short introduction?
Sure, absolutely. So as Darren just said, I'm Eddy Zakes. I am currently the director of the Entrepreneurship and Innovation Center at IESE Business School. I come from the United States, and so the name of the school itself can be a bit of a stumbling block. What am I supposed to call this school? So here in Spain, it's pronounced IESE Business School. In English, IESE, and we intermittently switch back and forth. So whatever you call it, we will understand. So I grew up in the United States. I come from a solidly middle-class family, the first kid in my family to pursue a graduate degree in business. And I was living in the United States in Dayton, Ohio. And there I was the director of advancement for a large private school. Not your traditional small private school, but a school that had at one point about 3,000 students and was operating 7 campuses. And as the vice president of advancement, I was running 6 divisions of that school: PR, marketing, communications, fundraising, alumni relations, and admissions. And one thing I love about the nonprofit world is that as a very young person, you can have tremendous opportunities because there's a ton of work and there isn't enough people to do all of that work. And so if you're willing, you will have all of the responsibilities that you can handle. And so I had kind of grown up within that organization, starting in fundraising, which this job in general, it would be a very unusual pre-MBA job experience. And, while the job was incredible and it gave me a ton of access to interesting people as a fundraiser, perhaps one of the hardest forms of sales you can do, you ask people to give you money. And as opposed to selling them a product and giving them a product, you take their money and you hopefully leave them with a feeling in their heart that they've done something worthwhile. You leave them with an emotion. And it turned out that I was at least passably good at this, and I advanced eventually to be the vice president of this school. But here I was, and I was maybe 28 years old, 29 years old, and the school that I was at within its industry niche was probably one of the top 10 private schools of its type in the world. And just for pure optics, the only position that was left above my role was the CEO of the school, or headmaster, superintendent, call it what you will. And just purely for optics, as a 28-year-old, whether I was qualified for the job or not, I wasn't going to be promoted to be the head of this school probably until I was 50. And even then I wasn't sure that I wanted that job, just because, it was a pre-K through 12th grade school. So 3 years old to 18 years old were the student range in the United States. And parents that are paying private school tuition, they want to entrust their children to responsible people. And so as a young person, they look at you and they say, I'm not sure this is the person. And so I said, okay, well, what's next? And I was drawn to getting an MBA for a very, I think, perhaps unusual reason. It was, at least initially, at the very beginning of the journey, I was my favorite professors in my undergraduate business program were those who were practitioners. They weren't the deep academics with wonky PhDs. It was the people who had really done this. And I said, if I could have a really great career and at the age of 55, have maybe an early retirement and take on a second career teaching business, I thought that would be incredibly fulfilling. And at least, in the United States, at, let's say, not an elite university, you could teach at the undergraduate level with just an MBA or another graduate degree, not necessarily a PhD. And so initially, it wasn't about getting an MBA from an incredible school. It was just about getting literally the 3 letters MBA attached to my name, because I needed that when I was 55 years old. And the university that was going to hire me someday in the future was going to hire me much more on the strength of what I had done in my career, and much less on, what university or graduate school of business did I attend. And so when I started exploring the MBA path, it was an introduction to a world that I knew absolutely nothing about. I ended up being an older student while I was at IESE. I think I started when I was 31. And so, I had finished my undergraduate degree as a 21-year-old. I haven't taken any standardized tests. I haven't done anything like this for many years. And so as I started exploring this, it was, the first step is, okay, to get into any reputable school, no matter where, you're going to take a GMAT. And so the world of education that I was in, there was no real great valuation placed on MBAs. Frankly, I kept most of the process a secret from my employer at the time, just studying on the nights and weekends and hustling to try to keep everything afloat in my day job. And so from that, I took the GMAT. I didn't score remarkably well. It was I think a good score. I scored a 680. And suddenly, given my 10 years in the nonprofit sector, I felt that while it wasn't necessarily highly likely, within reason, there was a chance at least that I could go to potentially any school I wanted to go to if they could see the value of my nonprofit work in combination with my GMAT. And so I started, what school should I go to? I started listening to all of the podcasts that I could and Touch MBA being one of them, but several others as well, on what were the distinctives of the different schools. Again, not coming from an MBA world, I didn't really know what the difference between the various schools were. And so I got turned on to IESE Business School, substantially and primarily through Touch MBA. Ended up applying to the school, was admitted. Of course, there's a lot more to the story I can get into, Darren, if you want to. But basically, I go through this process. I come to IESE as a student. One thing that is distinct about me is that I came to the MBA with a wife and 2 children. I moved from the United States to Spain with a 6-month-old and a 2-year-old, and my wife, and did the 2-year full-time MBA at IESE, graduated, and today IESE has hired me into this role as the director of the Entrepreneurship and Innovation Center.
Wow. Yeah, there is so much there. So my first question is, why Spain? As you told us, like, you had a family, you had a young family, you had 10 years of experience already, you were an older candidate, and all these things would generally point to people staying, I would say, more within their comfort zone,
Sure.
Closer to home, metaphorically speaking. But you
Right.
decided to, move to Spain and go to this top business school in Spain. Like, what was your thought process there?
Yes. No, I mean, I think it's a very good question. So, given my experience, I can't say that I necessarily could have gone to any school's executive MBA program or something like that. But within the region where I lived, there were 3 MBA programs within a 1-hour drive of my home that would be reputable, decent MBA programs. I was in Ohio, so Ohio State being one of them. So good programs. And I think the thought process was, as much as every admissions department will tell you that the rankings don't matter, if I was going to quit my job, whether I was going to go to a US-based school or an international school, my first consideration was, if I'm going to go full-time as opposed to taking, because again, originally only the interest was in getting the 3 letters behind my name. And so once I started to say, okay, maybe I have a shot at going to a more elite MBA program, it worth it to quit my job to move to do something like this. And so for me, the cutoff was top 10 MBA programs. And this was the list that I started to explore. At the time, IESE was ranked number 10 on the Financial Times MBA ranking. Poets and Quants similarly had it in a very good spot. IESE is consistently a school that kind of floats around the number 10 spot on those lists. And I don't remember specifically whose podcast I was listening to at the time, but whoever was talking said, by the time you're really done with your MBA admissions process, there will be 1 or 2 schools that really stand out to you as a school as you want to go to. And I heard this and I said, I mean, come on, are you kidding me? I would be proud to be a graduate of Stanford. I would be thrilled to get into Kellogg. I would be delighted to go to Harvard. And so on down the list. You take these schools, and I would be thrilled to go to any of them. These are incredible schools with exceptional reputations. And the truth is, by the time I was really done with the process, there were 2 schools that I was really attracted to. One was Tuck, and the other was IESE. And for similar reasons to both of them, smaller schools that prioritized a higher degree of collaboration and collegiality among the cohort, schools that were in somewhat unique settings, etc. And so the podcast that I specifically listened to from Touch MBA, I went back in the archives to see if I could find it. It was episode 37 from Anjan, and I'm going to tell Darren, currently it's actually not available at least from Apple Podcast. It's not in the library there. You can find it on his website. But listening to that podcast, Anjan, what he said was, he talked about, kind of the values of the school. And for whatever reason, that really, really resonated with me. I come from this nonprofit world, especially education, and education is all about, today we change tomorrow. When you invest in a young person's life, you don't just change what happens to them right now, but you potentially put them on a trajectory for the rest of their life. And so something about what he was saying really clicked with me. And IESE is a school now, having attended, and again, I didn't attend any other school, so I can't specifically say what another school has, but what stood out to me here was that this is a very, very values-driven school. Every school is going to talk about ethics and integrity in their marketing materials. You have to in today's business environment. And I think all of them genuinely mean it, and they all want to produce graduates who prioritize ethics, integrity, leadership, etc. But at IESE, it's very much a part of the DNA of the school. And so as I started to go down the admissions funnel, each person that I spoke to only reinforced this. And I ended up in the first round applying to, I think, 4 schools. And of those 4 schools, I did interviews at 3 of them. And IESE continued to be the one that was truly the best fit for me. And when I received the acceptance, I basically rejected and ignored the other ones. And that was the start of it. Regarding why on earth you'd make the huge move all the way to Spain, I think that's a very fair question. And the first thing that I would say, and of course, others would maybe in the admissions department. Again, I'm not an admissions representative. I'm in entrepreneurship and innovation here. So what I would say is a big part of what you buy when you buy an MBA is you buy a network. And at any great school, the quality of that network is very good. But what stood out to me about IESE was the network here was very, very, very different from the network that I had. As a successful fundraiser in the United States, if you were to take a map and put a pin where all of my contacts and connections are in the world, they would be almost exclusively in the United States in 2014 when I started this journey. And I really wanted to internationalize that network. At IESE, our current class has somewhere around 60 different countries, 60 different nationalities represented in the class. And I think that this is incredibly informative to the learning style of the school. So the second piece of the school I think that stood out is the case methodology. And so first was the internationalness of the school. Second, case method. I wanted to study at a school that favored the case method. IESE uses the case method extensively, almost exclusively. It's a very, very demanding, rigorous school. We do about 650 cases is the number that I've heard repeated over the years during the 2 years of the program. So it's not like a fluff vacation in sunny Barcelona. It's a ton of work. It just happens to be work in beautiful Barcelona. And so I wanted the case method. I think that for me, this learning methodology of being much more interactive, conversational was going to serve me well. The case method lets you, I guess you could say that each case is typically written about the protagonist of the case. It would be a career defining decision that the person is going to make. And while you certainly as a student don't experience that career defining decision in the same way as the protagonist, what you do is you get to practice making those kinds of decisions over and over and over. And so if you get to practice 630 or 650 of these career-defining decisions, you certainly aren't going to remember all of them, but the way that you are trained to make those types of decisions will stick with you. And so I found that very attractive. I think perhaps a third thing is going a little bit counter or contrarian to the direction of the stream. And so I think when everybody else is trying to get into an MBA program in the United States, so many international candidates are looking to come to the United States for the opportunities that it affords them. I think it creates opportunities for people who are willing to go the opposite direction. And this is part of the idea of studying in Spain was the number of international people coming to the US versus the number of American candidates that are going to go to Europe or to other international schools is much lower. And so maybe I thought that path would be easier. And so, I can't say whether it is or isn't easier, but it would be less competitive instead of it being, 80% American students, in your cohort or something. Here, it was about 10% of the students at the time were from the United States. That percentage has now crept upwards substantially as the reputation of ESA has grown. So I think maybe those things in combination were the things that led me here. On the other hand, people are always going to point out that Barcelona is an exceptional place to live. And that is very, very true. I think that to make a decision about where you want to go to school based on just geography alone, especially an attractive geography, is probably not the right decision or right, criteria for a decision. And so I think to me, Barcelona is a bonus and a very nice bonus, but just a bonus.
No, that's awesome. And I actually do agree with you on the third point. I mean, it's something that has evolved over the history of this podcast and our website. But I do think that there really is a golden opportunity for like US candidates applying to international schools, whether that's in Asia or Europe. I mean, if having a more international class or a different experience is something you'd like to do, I think that's a real opportunity.
Let me add to that as well. I think what happens is, as a young person who grew up in the United States in an American US household and went to a US undergraduate business program, I learned a very American way of conducting business. And there's nothing wrong with the American way of conducting business. It's been tremendously successful. But it is a very different way of doing business than perhaps what is done in Japan or done in Brazil or in China or India, or pick where, you're in Vietnam, pick wherever. And there are nuances to this that color and enrich the decision-making process. So at ESA, in your first year, you're part of a lockstep cohort. We divide you into sections, and within your section, you're assigned to a team. And the school teams, you don't as a student. And on the first day of school, you meet your teammates. And I think in mine, there were 8 of us, and it was 2 students from Spain. So about 20% of the students, I think it's 15 to 20% of our students are Spanish. So it was 2 from Spain, 1 from India, 1 from China, or Hong Kong or China, 1 from Japan, 1 from Brazil, Belgium, and then I was the lone representative from North America. And so when every single day you're meeting together as a team and the student from Hong Kong is describing, well, I would approach this case or this problem this way, that's a way that frankly I had never really thought about doing business before. And while I would like to think that, I'm from the United States and sometimes we're stereotyped as being, narrow-minded or whatever, I'd like to think that by virtue of being willing to take an international MBA, I'm more open-minded. I still don't think I was prepared for the variety that was presented. And for me, I think this is probably if not the biggest takeaway, one of the biggest takeaways from my MBA experience was just the rubbing of shoulders and the sharpening of my decision-making from the international cultural exchange.
I'm actually curious to know more about that. Like what after having gone through the ESA experience, what were the pros and cons?
Sure. So I think one thing I would just say right away, and I think, if I think as something that I wish I had known more of is to have thought through reputational aspects of each school. So you need to think about the geography of the school is going to be, it's going to make the reputation the strongest in its home base. And so IESE has 43 or 45,000 alumni around the world. It has this strong alumni base. It is exceptionally well known, of course, in Spain. It's well known in Latin America. The rest of Europe is strong as well. But as you go to the United States, it is not as strong of a brand. And that's totally okay. But if you think that you want to get a job in a very niche field, a niche sector, in a geography that your school isn't particularly well known in, for me to go and get recruited into a tech startup in Silicon Valley, they have not heard of ESE Business School, or few have heard of it. And of course, this is improving every day with 40,000 alumni around the world, but it still is something I think that you have to consider. So I think especially internationally, if you're going to go to a business school in China or in Europe or somewhere else in Asia, this is something that's critically important. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't go there. It means you need to be aware of this challenge or this hurdle. And if you're interested in working in the geography of the school, then it certainly isn't a barrier. And if anything, it's only helpful. And it's the same is true for US schools. Of course, the reputation of a school in Michigan is, Ross is going to be, they're going to employ a lot of people in Michigan. It's the same, for any other school, but certainly for international schools, it's even a bigger hurdle because of the distance. Other things, I think that certainly the style of collaboration at ESE is very, very high. So as I mentioned, you're thrust into this team environment. The school pushes it, promotes it. It wants you to work as a unit, and it works. It really works. They are the ones who make the team. They are looking at the profile of each incoming student to make a team that presents a challenging learning environment, but ultimately one that they believe will be a successful learning environment. I think at any school, you're going to hear about like the sort of lifelong relationships that are built from just spending time together. It is a sort of crucible, just like a military boot camp or something like that. You have this shared experience of the highs and lows and the everyday slog. And so I think that certainly is true at ESE, but you see it here in areas that could be extremely competitive. When we have a recruiter on campus and we know that recruiter is only going to hire 3 candidates into a consultancy, or they're going to hire 5 people into this sort of rotational program, and you know that the people that are sitting next to you are your competitors technically, but when they come out of the interview and you're sitting on the bench for the next person in, and they give you the tips of, hey, they asked about this, you should be ready for that, and people are sharing with a sort of open-handed approach, this is the environment that ESE is working to foster. And to me, that's an incredibly attractive place. The elbows here are not sharp. Nobody is pushing and shoving to get to the front. We believe that, give first, and you'll be rewarded with more opportunities. And the school, I think, works hard to kind of inculcate that sort of mindset in our students.
Yeah, I mean, so on that note, I think you find a lot of discussion in the forums and in blogs, in the MBA applicant world, saying that it is a bit tougher to do recruiting at a European school if you're not, say, a Spaniard in Spain or, a French person in France, for example. And I was wondering, what your experience was with both the ESE network and also as an American. I'm not sure how good your Spanish was or is, but looking
Yes.
for jobs in Spain. And maybe you can also share kind of what you saw with your classmates as well. And I'm just trying to get our listeners who are seriously considering, European
Sure.
schools, what do they need to know,
Sure, absolutely. So I think first, I don't work in career services, so the perfect statistics I don't have. So this is more just from my own personal experience, more than anything else. I think off the cuff, the challenges are real. I think you have to be prepared as a candidate to answer the question about visas, to understand what sort of work authorizations that you have. The school does tremendously well statistically with doing placements. The results speak for themselves as far as the number of students who have a job within 90 days of graduation or at graduation. I think they're competitive with any school more or less. And so, the dedicated team in career services is doing a killer job. I think ESE is a school that has, let's say in Spain, a very strong reputation. I was telling a student this morning who was asking about the visa situation. Spain has a visa category for people who have high potential. So, if coming as somebody who's from the United States, we offer visas to people in scientific fields in the United States when it's a field that we have job demand in. We always need more nuclear scientists from other countries, and they get visas quite readily. And so in Spain, attending IESE gives you the high potential status automatically. It's conferred upon you with your degree, essentially, because the reputation of the school is that high, and they want to keep this talent in Spain. So as I understand it, you have more or less a sort of guaranteed approval on the process. It still means you have to go through the process, but you should get a favorable outcome when a company wants to sponsor your visa process. I mean, they mark you as high potential because you went to ESA and you get the visa. So I think for most traditional MBA employers, they are willing to do that sponsorship. I mean, our biggest recruiters are, companies like McKinsey, Amazon. We do a lot of recruiting with AB InBev. We do a fair amount with Google, and the list goes on. I mean, I'm of course going to forget somebody important, so I won't keep going. But I think the point is that, these people see the potential of our graduates and readily hire them, and they hire them throughout the European Union to Latin America. We do a lot with rotational programs. And I think what it says about you as a candidate by the fact that you did an international MBA is that you have the sort of international aspirations that today's large corporations want their employees to have, and that you're open to relocation, you're open to new geography, manager, general, or having the sort of category or brand management or whatever within a company, and you have that sort of cultural flexibility, and they say, they snap up that talent and they're willing to put you through whatever the visa process is. So I think, it of course is going to depend on you and your profile and the niche that you want to go into, the sector that you want to go into, as far as how easy or hard it is. I mean, I work specifically with entrepreneurship, startups, et cetera. And, I would say that, the startup world is going to be a slightly different thing. When a startup needs to hire you, they don't want to wait for, 90 days while you go through a visa process. They're trying to hire people for a job that they have an opening for now, and they want to fill that job as quickly as possible. And so, that work authorization in, let's say, the startup world is going to be a bigger challenge than if you want to work for McKinsey and they're willing to wait, 90 days for you to complete your visa process.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but it's not like half the jobs are kind of like off limits because you don't speak the local language. Do you know what I mean?
I completely know what you mean. So, I mean, of course, being multilingual is going to give you a leg up on, the other potential candidates for a job. In many in some roles, they're going to ask for you to be a Spanish speaker. In other cases, it's not being a Spanish speaker. It's we're a European company, and if you can speak English, that's the most important to us. And if you can speak another language, that's just bonus. Most of the companies that are hiring MBAs are English first companies. And so anything after English is considered, just makes your profile more attractive to HR. So I don't think, for me, I came to Spain speaking very little Spanish. Part of the reason I was hired in this role is also because of potentially my ability to add internationalization to our entrepreneurship initiatives as a school. So Spanish wasn't a big priority for them when they hired me. And I to this day, I speak enough Spanish to get in a taxi from my house and make it to the airport that's 25 minutes away. And I can talk to the cab driver the whole way, but every cab driver has more or less heard the same exact story. I'm Eddie, I'm from the United States, I work for ESA, blah, blah, blah. I have my set phrases down really well, and I can survive and navigate the city, but I'm certainly not an exceptional Spanish speaker by any stretch of the imagination, and I've survived just fine. The 24% of the population of Barcelona is foreign, and so it's an incredibly cosmopolitan city, and you'll do fine, speaking very little Spanish. And the more you know, the easier your life will be, but it shouldn't be a barrier, and I don't think it's a huge barrier to employers either.
Yeah. Gosh, I have so many questions that I've written down here that are going many different directions, but let's give it a shot.
Okay.
So first question is, going through an MBA with a young family. Gosh, I mean, I'm sure some of our listeners are in that same position, but we haven't had many guests actually talk about it. So I was just wondering, very broad question, but how can someone who is in your shoes best prepare for this?
So first, my kids were super little. So, I had a 6-month-old and a 2-year-old. And so, they didn't really have a vote in the process. They go where mom and dad go. They don't, if they want to eat, they come with us. And so, that was much easier for us. Our kids weren't in school. Our kids, yes, maybe we took them from their friends, but my son is 2 years old. I don't know how well he knows his friends,
Yeah.
And so it's more of a decision with your partner or your spouse to make sure that you're on the same page. And I think that is critically important. For the conversations that my wife and I had about, is she really, really, truly okay with this? For 2 years, I more or less knew what I was going to be doing every single waking minute. I'm going to automatically have a friends group, a peer group. I'm going to be in a group. ESA is a school that does, all of its classes are in English. So my classmates are all going to be English speakers. I'm going to be comfortable, but what about my partner or spouse? And so is she okay, or is he okay with the adventure that I'm going on? And I think this prep was really important. ESA does a really good job. We have a Partners and Families Club that's extremely active, with 80% of our students coming from other places around the world. And with this being such an expat-friendly city, we have just literally thousands and thousands of expats in the city. There is a strong community. The school gave me a getting started guide when we were accepted or whatever. And I don't remember exactly, but I would guess that the getting started guide was, a PDF, maybe 50 pages long. And my wife, when the Partners and Families Club connected with her, they sent her a 120-page getting started guide. And the getting started guide had, here's a list of pediatricians who speak English. Here's a list of dentists who are friendly to expats. Here's restaurants that serve all these different cuisines from around the world so you can have a taste of home. And this guide had been passed on from generation to generation of students and added and edited along the way at every step. And I think it is a family that you join. And I think this is true for many international schools, but I think ESA especially did this really nice job of making it a family event, that it wasn't just me that was in the customer service path, but my wife was in the customer service path as well. So I think, what's it like as a student? I had a different set of demands and expectations than many of my classmates, when they went out to the bar after class to hang out. I had to go.
You're going where I wanted to go. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
so how do you do this all?
It's hard. I think it's super hard. I think, there are aspects of my MBA experience that were very different from my classmates, but it's not an exclusive group where I was the only one. I would say that now ESA has 350 students that we accept each year, more or less, maybe 375, somewhere in this range. And in my year, we only had 4 sections at the time. Now we have 5, but with 4 and 275 students or thereabout, I think that, there were probably around 30 of us who had kids. And one thing that you see with international MBAs is that the student profile tends to be a little bit older, which lends itself to more families. And so ESA was aware of that. I think in the first year of the MBA, where we do a lockstep cohort and everybody is taking the same classes, and you tend to be much more with the same group of people day in and day out, one of the first things that you encounter in any MBA is a high degree of FOMO, and everything is exciting and everything is new, and you're still trying to figure out, what do I want to be when I grow up? Should I go to this consulting club activity? Oh, well, this group, we're in Barcelona, they're going sailing on Saturday. I want to go sailing. And wait, should I go to this investment banking modeling class? And should I, it's on Saturday, what should I do? And I think a big part of what you learn during any MBA program is you learn about prioritization, and you learn about saying no and only saying yes to the things that really matter. And what you find in the second year of our program is that this is when students can choose which classes they want to take themselves. And ESA is a general management school, so you We don't offer specializations in finance or in marketing or any other thing. You get one MBA program, but in the second year, you as a student create your specialization by picking the courses that are important to you. And when you start to do this, you see that students are much better at refining their choices in that second year because they've had this experience in the second year where they probably tried to do too many things. And while perhaps this is a little bit of an extreme example, I mean, I don't know the exact number, but for me, I would say I could maybe do 4 things at a time. One of them being spend time with my family, another one being sleep, the third one being study, and the fourth one being look for an internship. And maybe you can pick a fifth. I'm not, maybe that's a little bit extreme, but you can't do 7 or 8 things well. And initially you try to do that. And so for me, one of my 4 things that I could do was spend time with my family. And for somebody else, that was a choice that they had to go traveling every weekend, or it was, I can learn to scuba dive or tango or whatever it is that you want to, extra. And for me, I had to have this think that that's the reality as a family accompanied student, is that you have a different set of pressures. You also, to be clear, have perhaps an additional financial pressure in the job search. And so listen, if I was single or if it was just me and my wife and we didn't have kids and I can live super cheap and I can extend my job search for an extra couple of months, and it doesn't really matter where I live or whatever because I'm a young single dude. Like, this is a different sort of pressure. I can live with a bunch of roommates and eat ramen noodles. And so, most of the people who come to the school with families, they feel certainly a burden of responsibility. You're a serious student. It's very important that you get everything that you possibly can get out of the experience. And I felt a lot of times just psychologically, I think this is common. I don't think I'm alone in this, but you feel a degree of pressure to be able to tell the people who are back home or who are the doubters or who are saying you're crazy to quit your job and move around the world. You want to show them that you made the right decision. And certainly that's an amount of pressure. And so I do think as a student with a family, you are going to have a different experience. It will still be amazing. It will still be rewarding. You will still make deep friendships. But on the other hand, it will also be different in other ways as well.
And your experience. And I think that's a really good way to look at it. Like, you can only do 3 or 4 things. What are those things going to be? But if I can combine 2 questions into one, so I'm curious to know, what was your favorite class? Or not what was your favorite class, but what class have you found most useful? And I'd also like to ask you about just, your experience with the case study method, whether you felt like it was effective.
Oh, absolutely. So the first answer is on the case method, absolutely. I think it's, like I said earlier, ESA is an intense school. I wouldn't dance around that at all. It is
650 cases, no joke.
Yeah, and to be clear, that number might be plus or minus a certain amount. I don't know the exact number, but that's the number that we always toss around, and we always take the Instagram photo of the entire caseload from the first year piled up. And, depending on where you're from, it's either a meter tall or 3 feet tall. And it's insane. And you consume and consume and consume, and you drink out of a fire hose. Of course, there are certain professors and courses that stand out. I think just generally, we have a course that you take right off the bat when you first arrive that's called Analysis of Business Problems. And it's a very generalist course, and it's designed to get you into a sort of framework for analyzing business issues. And it's not meant to present it only from a finance perspective or only from a leadership or hiring perspective or only from marketing or whatever. It's business problems are complex, they're multifaceted, and you need to think about it from this sort of perspective. So that class definitely stands out to me. Another class that stood out to me is a course called Decision Analysis. And so, as I mentioned, my personal background is kind of more on the sales and marketing side. And I'm the sort of person who usually would say that, you should double down on your strengths as opposed to necessarily spinning your wheels trying to correct your weaknesses. I mean, of course, you should learn to manage your weaknesses. And for me, the idea of decision analysis and, the real data-driven decision-making approach was something that I was probably weak on. And I probably, in some ways, if it was just up to me, I don't know whether I would have taken the class. But it's part of that first year where you're being put into these situations that are designed to stretch you. And what's interesting about the lockstep cohort at IESE is whether your background is in marketing or not, you're going to take the fundamental marketing course. You could be a data scientist before you came here, and you're going to take decision analysis. And what this does is I might be really strong on the marketing side. And so I'm going to help carry the weight in my team and in the class sessions with my section on this as a quote unquote expert. But when it comes to decision analysis, this is where somebody else is going to pick up the slack for me. And so these courses, I think first they showed me a different way of making decisions. Second, that course on decision analysis was taught by Franz Heukamp, who today is the dean of the school. And it was taught by him the year I was in that course when he was, I don't know his exact title at the time, but he was the dean of the MBA program. And, this person who has this kind of high academic title is still making sure that he was in front of students on a regular basis, teaching, not losing touch with what the most important part of the school is, which is the students. I think that spoke volumes. And I think I didn't fail academically in that course, but it was difficult for me. And I think MBAs in general are people who are usually pretty successful and things come to them easily. And we get good grades through high school and college and whatever. And we are fast climbers in our careers and everything else. And when you get into a course and you maybe struggle with it, I think this is also extremely valuable. And so that class stands out. In the second year, when I was choosing the courses that I wanted to take, it was when I was focusing heavily on venture capital, entrepreneurship, early stage investing, and these sort of courses. And so remarkable professors in this space as well. We have a professor, Heinrich Lichtenstein, and he teaches a course called Private Equity Venture Capital. And it's the case method. But what he does is every single class, he's bringing in the protagonist of the case as a guest speaker. We have a course that is on personality and happiness. And I think this is an incredibly popular course because we're saying, okay, I'm chasing my dreams, but is this really going to make me happy? And the course is taught by a psychiatrist who has had appointments with the United Nations dealing with conflict regions, specifically things like negotiating with the Taliban and, really, really intense situations. Very respected professor. And these courses really bring it to life and help you realize that, ESA is known as a school that focuses on the human experience of business. And it's not just about making money. It's not just about making as much money as possible. It's about difference in through people and for people and with people. And so these professors model this by the way they interact with us as students, and they are giving. And so those maybe some of those professors stand out.
No, thank you so much for sharing those, because I think sometimes that experience gets overlooked, I feel. And, like the actual classroom experience. So this is a question I plan to ask a lot more in future podcasts, and I'm curious kind of how recent graduates answer it and graduates that have been out for 15 years answer it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But on that note, you talked about like those amazing classes in entrepreneurship. I really wanted to ask you, as you're the director, of entrepreneurship and innovation at IESE, like how much can these MBA programs help aspiring entrepreneurs? I think a lot of applicants, this generation of applicants especially, they want to start their own business or be a part of a startup.
Right.
And it's really in the forefront right now. And so I'm wondering, based on your experience, both as a student and as the director of the center, like what types of applicants do you think would be best suited towards getting an MBA and trying to learn more about entrepreneurship within an MBA as opposed to, say, just starting their own business?
No, I think that's a very, very fair question. I think it's something that every applicant needs to consider, and whether they're interested in entrepreneurship or something completely unrelated, is that they need to think through, why am I getting this degree and does it make sense for me today? So I think, an MBA makes a lot of sense for entrepreneurs because it gives them, the broad general skill set, the experience, the education to grow a business in a diverse, framework. And so, a lot of entrepreneurs come from a background in engineering. They come from the science perspective. They come from kind of one narrow field or space. And that can become incredibly limiting. So within the Entrepreneurship Center here, we have an emphasis on tech transfer, the commercialization of deep science projects. And we work with local universities, a research center, innovation hubs, et cetera, where a scientist perhaps has developed something absolutely cutting edge, and they're struggling with the commercialization of it. They don't have the skill set or the toolbox to say, does my idea have potential in the real world? And how do I, even if it does have the potential, how do I convert the potential into reality? And I think an MBA can give you this sort of broad toolbox to help with that. So I think the quick answer is yes, absolutely. The second thing I would say is, at IESE, we have kind of, I think, maybe 4 pillars as a school, and we've touched on all of them very briefly. But first, we're a general management school. We believe that it's important to have this sort of non-specialist general framework. Second, we have global scope. That's very important to us. Third, it's for leadership development. And fourth, it's for entrepreneurial mindset. So I believe that every business leader, whether they're running a 3-person startup or a huge multinational corporation, needs to think and behave entrepreneurially. And I don't think that entrepreneurship is so much a noun as it is a verb. It's something that it's not something you're born with. You're not born an entrepreneur, but just like I think that you're not born a leader, but anyone can learn to lead. I think anybody can learn to think and act entrepreneurially. So even if you didn't grow up coding your first app in a basement or a garage or something like this, and you don't wear jeans and a hooded sweatshirt, you still have to think entrepreneurially. And so we want every single student to go on this entrepreneurial journey. We want each of them to inculcate this sort of behavior or mindset. And so, whether they want to work in a startup or start something of their own, entrepreneurship has a place. And so entrepreneurship is, I believe, best learned through the combination of classroom instruction and hands-on experiential learning. And, we have an exceptional entrepreneurship faculty that is very accomplished and well-regarded, and they handle a lot of the classroom instruction. I think where I come in and the team that I work with, we come in is more on the experiential learning side. So, I run our summer accelerator program. We have something called the Summer Entrepreneurship Experience, where instead of going and getting an internship with a corporation, you can pursue your own startup idea. In 2 weeks, I'm taking a group of students on a trip to Berlin to visit the Berlin startup ecosystem. We take a trip to Silicon Valley. We do another one of these trips, even though it sounds strange to call it a trek. We do have a Barcelona startup trek where we visit some of the players in our local ecosystem. We as a school have a small venture capital fund that invests exclusively in IESE alumni founded projects. We have the Business Angel Network that has invested over 40 million euros in startup projects that don't have to be exclusively IESE founded projects. We have all of these different things, mentoring, coaching, supporting students, the clubs and various initiatives. And this all somehow falls under me and coordinating, all of these various initiatives is what my job entails. And so it's tremendously exciting. And I think that entrepreneurship offers something to every candidate, whether specifically, startup focused or not.
Yeah. And I mean, did you see many of your classmates start businesses that were incubated at IESE, or maybe even before they came to the program, after they graduated? Or do you see, I would expect a more common path to be maybe your classmates get nice jobs, and then a couple years later, they start their businesses? Like, I'm just curious what the scene is like now.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's absolutely both. And so every year we have a handful of students who launch a business immediately after graduation. I think in this most recent graduating class of 2018, it's probably somewhere in the range of 10 of our students are actively pursuing an entrepreneurial venture as their full-time activity. There are many others who are doing it as a side hustle, and I think that can be very prudent as well. I think sometimes the reality of coming out of the MBA potentially with a lot of debt doesn't provide you with the financial flexibility and freedom to pursue that dream. And I also think that it can be valuable for some people to go into a traditional corporate job. What ends up happening, and I love these people, is first, in 2 years, they've paid off their debt. Second, they hate their job. And I love that, because that makes them have this exceptional drive, and they say, I never want to work in this setting again. But what has happened in those 2 years is that they also have a much bigger problem that they want their startup to address. And so a lot of times the sort of problems that MBAs have dealt with in their pre-MBA life tend to be smaller problems, and they're still good problems. I mean, they're solving real problems, but they tend to be smaller problems. And so spending a year or two in a corporate setting, whether that's a consultancy or an investment bank or a big industrial job, you see real problems from a different perspective. You have a higher perspective now that you're post-MBA, maybe a more management-driven perspective. And then the third thing is that you've built a better network around addressing that problem. So when you graduate from the MBA, you have a personal network. It includes a lot of people who are just like you, though. And so, that those 2 years can be really valuable, because when you come back to address the problem as an entrepreneur, those people in your network are your investors. They are your first customers. They're the ones who you're actually solving the problem for. But that doesn't mean that you can't be successful immediately out of school. We have a website, ESA or IESE40under40.com, IESE40under40.com, that highlights the most recent group of 40 entrepreneurs who have done exceptional things. I mean, we have a unicorn or two in that group. We have, one of our recent graduates, Avi, is the founder and CEO of a company called Travel Perk that just announced this week that they raised $44 million in a Series C here in Europe. I met with an entrepreneur last week that founded the company in 2012 and just did an IPO last Tuesday on the Frankfurt Exchange. So, I mean, we have these great stories of entrepreneurs who leave the program and build very successful companies. I do think it's important for your listeners to know that school is, be very careful to not be, overselling or overpromising what we can do as a school, especially in the area of entrepreneurship. I mean, it's an incredibly difficult path. You, as the founder of your startup, will make or break that company's success. You're responsible for it, not us. I can't make you successful. I can't bring guaranteed investment dollars. I'm going to try to do everything I can to give you the tools and resources to be successful, but ultimately it's going to be up to you. And I whenever I speak with an admissions candidate, the admissions team will sometimes forward really strong entrepreneurship focused candidates to me just to talk to them about their plans and make sure that they're in line with what the school can do. But that's always one of the first things I tell them is, listen, I'm going to do everything I can to help you be successful. But even with all of that, the rate of startup failure is high. It's going to be hard. You're going to have to juggle this with your class schedule. Being the CEO and founder of a company while you're in a school that has a rigorous, course load, it's hard, and it's going to be really, really hard. You'll come out of it better, but I'm not going to try to hide the fact that it's going to be a difficult path.
No, that's awesome. And I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you, for those MBA applicants who are interested in entrepreneurship and MBAs and are exploring IESE or other top schools, right? What do you think? What questions should they ask people in your position or admissions officers?
I mean, I think that first one of what sort of resources. I mean, this is again off the cuff, so no time to prep, Darren. Thanks for the questions, right? But I think let's go over our notes. I didn't see this in the no. But I think the answer is, I mean, I think it would be great to ask them to introduce you to some entrepreneurs who have gone through the school. As much as I hope that I'm presenting a fair and balanced approach to what our school offers, always trying to be complimentary of what other schools are doing. In some ways, I'm a paid spokesperson for the school. I hope that I still have some objectivity. On the other hand, a graduate of our school, yes, they have some burden of promotion to their alma mater, but they are the best ones. Ask for an introduction to 2 or 3 great entrepreneurs who will give that perspective. I would ask about the specific resources. I would ask, not necessarily. So ask those entrepreneurs any questions you have. Ask them what their experience was like. Ask them for what the highs and lows were to those reference entrepreneurs or whatever. I think it's also great if you get them unreferenced and or unreferred, and you say, hey, I wanted to reach out to you without going through the school, and based on how quickly the people respond or how enthusiastic their response is, keeping in mind, of course, that if it's really a successful entrepreneur, their time is incredibly valuable. And so they might not respond to you just on the basis of, hey, I have no idea who you are and I'm trying to build a company. Yeah. On the other hand, so that might backfire. So maybe that's a dangerous answer. But on the other hand, I think trying to speak to some entrepreneurs who have gone through the program is the first thing I would say. The second thing is ask for the resources. Say, if I come to your school, what does it look like? Walk me through what year 1 and year 2, if it's a 2-year program, what can I expect? What happens in the first year related to entrepreneurship? What kind of trips do we go on? What are the club activities? We have a really robust startup and entrepreneurship club. Of the 350 or whatever incoming students, about 100 of them just joined our startup and entrepreneurship club from this current batch. And so it is a priority area for the school. I'm sitting in a 300 square meter, and I have no idea how many square feet that is, but a pretty sizable entrepreneurship space here that's called the Venture Hub. I actually just moved into it last week, and so it's brand new. It still smells like paint, but it's a space that has a dedicated space to make sure that entrepreneurs feel like their needs are being met and addressed. And so, what does it look like if I'm actually an entrepreneur at your school? I'm not asking you to promise me everything, but tell me what's it going to actually look like, and see what they say. But I think most important is those references.
Yeah, I love that advice. Would there be any questions you would encourage them to ask about the school's alumni network?
I don't know that that's a question that I would say is, maybe I'm not thinking of it the right way, but I think, the general question about that you would ask as a candidate to any school, whether you're interested in entrepreneurship or not, is to understand, how active the alumni community is. Is there going to be chapters or activities or communication that's happening in the region where I hope to live? Are they responsive to the question? So I remember I lived in flyover country in the United States. I lived in the Midwest before the MBA, and IESE doesn't have the strongest brand in the United States. But like I said, obviously, I want to always add that it's growing, and it's not a bad brand. It just isn't the same as some other schools. But I reached out to an alumnus who was one of the closest recent graduates was in a city probably an hour and a half from me, and said, hey, can we meet? I didn't really know what to expect, and he actually met me halfway, and so drove 45 minutes, and I drove 45 minutes to meet him in the middle, and we met at a restaurant, and I thought, this is just going to be like kind of quick drinks. I don't want to take too much of this guy's time. And the guy, we talked until probably 11 o'clock at night, and he told me, answered every question. And then 2 days later sent a follow-up email saying, hey, I thought of somebody else you should talk to. Let me introduce you to this person. And this is, whether it's IESE or another business school, this is the sort of thing you want from the alumni community, that they're proud of their school and want to give back aggressively, not just passively, but actively looking for opportunities to do more to help the school get better. And so I think that question to alumni of, just walk me through your experience. What do you think? The questions that you're asking on this podcast, what were the highs and lows? What were your favorite courses? If you were to describe the school in a few words, what would be the few words you would describe the school with? Tell me about the spirit of competition versus collaboration. Tell me about this, and this. It's a fairly basic but broad set of questions and then over time, you'll refine that list with the things that stand out as most important to you.
I love that idea of look for alumni who are aggressively engaging with you. I think that's really cool. So I have only two more questions, Eddy.
Okay.
One is, I'm really curious to hear like your perspective on, I guess, the startup scene in Spain or more widely in Europe, if you feel qualified to comment on it, versus the US.
Sure.
Like, do you see any major differences?
Yes, it is there. I mean, there are definitely differences. I think compared to the United States, what is changing here is attitude towards risk. Europe tended to be more risk averse than the United States. I mean, I think, and this is me speaking very stereotypically as a foreigner, et cetera. So, I'm not native, and they might say something different, but I think, venture capital in Europe was born first out of private equity. And so that has changed substantially even in the last 10 years. But, initially the older, more experienced venture capital managers maybe had their upbringing in and around private equity. And so that sort of risk assessment still flavors, although it is definitely more venture capital focused than private equity, it still maybe flavors a certain generation. That generation is being very, very aggressively and quickly replaced. And so attitude towards risk is changing. We see as a school that our entrepreneurs are kind of like wine vintages. And so the economic crisis hit Spain later than it hit the United States. And so, 2007, 8, 9 in the United States. And here it was more like 9, 10, 11. And so one of our best vintages of entrepreneurs comes from the class of 2011. And it was born out of, what did the job market look like? And was it more attractive to pursue my own startup than have an uncertain future in a large corporation, or large corporations weren't hiring very much? And so the risk of me starting a company was lower. And so you see the United States, a lot of entrepreneurship has been born out of immigration. We're a nation as Americans of immigrants. And I think in the same way, that created a certain appetite for risk. I've already transported my family all the way from Europe or wherever I immigrated from. And so what's one more risk of trying to build a small business? And I think the same in Europe and some of the crises that have happened. And so when there's a crisis going on, there already is a feeling of risk. And so what's one more risk to start a company? Thankfully, today the economy is doing very, very well. Barcelona is a startup hub that has over 1,100 startups. It's considered the third most attractive city in Europe to start up a business in after Berlin and London. It is perhaps the mobile technology test bed. It will be, we are the host of Mobile World Congress, which is the foremost mobile telephonic, conference in the world. This is a city that is considered the fourth most preferred city in the world to live in and work in, according to the Boston Consulting Group. I mean, this is a very, very attractive place. And so people want to move here to build their companies. It's easy to attract talent. If you could say, would you rather go work for a startup if you're getting paid the same exact amount of money and you can live in a cold and rainy, climate in Northern Europe, or you can live on the beaches in Barcelona with palm trees and parrots? Thanks, I'll choose Barcelona. And so, this is an incredibly attractive city. The scene here is just bursting. We've had something, I don't have the stat right on hand, but we've had major technology innovation hubs move here recently. We have activity from HP, from Facebook. Facebook just opened a big office here. Nestle has an innovation center here. Several banks have major innovation things here. The mobile bank N26 just opened a big office here. We have, reference companies, several sectors that call Barcelona home. So, it's a thriving, active startup scene. And, that's true in other parts of Europe as well. My experience is more focused on Spain. I worked, a little bit in venture capital in both Madrid and in Barcelona. And these two cities are the ones that I know the best. And there's plenty going on here. It's a really great place to start a company. And talent here is, if you grow your company and you need to hire talent, Of course, depending on where you're coming from, that would be what you should compare to. But compared to the United States, talent here is still incredibly inexpensive. And because of the crisis, many people stayed in their universities longer. So instead of coming out into a bad job market, they said, oh, I'll just stay in school a little longer and get a master's degree as well. And so right now, there's a lot of talent coming onto the scene that has master's degrees in engineering, but are looking for still early career wage levels, even though they may have strong academic credentials. And this serves startups really well because they can get better qualified employees, but at a great price. So it's a great place to build a company.
Man, yeah, the third best city after London and Berlin. And I mean, I haven't been to Berlin, but been to Barcelona and London. I definitely liked Barcelona more as a tourist, as a complete tourist person. But
we have a pretty decent football or soccer team as well.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
It's not, I mean, I live here, like I said, I moved here with a wife and children, and none of us spoke, really any Spanish, and we've managed to survive just fine. It's an attractive, easy place to live. I mean, it's easy to present a very glamorous life on Instagram. Today, the sun is just beaming down. It's gorgeous. Right outside of my window is a huge, sun-soaked terrace. And so it's easy to present that. On the other hand, you're coming to the school hopefully to study and work hard. And it's not all easy. On the other hand, it is a nice bonus, like I said earlier.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And to kind of bring it all full circle, Eddy, well, thank you first of all so much. Like, this has been really fun to talk to you. But my last question is about, imagine Eddy from 2014 looking to get those 3 letters on his resume, looking at top-ranked schools internationally and at home. What would be your number one tip for applicants to have a great MBA experience?
Oh, that's a big question.
Yeah, I wanted to actually ask you about, like, what's your best application tip? But I think I want to make it more broad.
Yeah.
Than that.
Well, yeah. And I don't work in admissions, so I don't know what my tip is. That's a technical tip. I think what I would tell myself if I could, go back and whisper in my ear from way back when, would be a couple of things. I think you probably won't regret taking big chances. I think even if ultimately it fails and it's the worst case scenario, in the world that we live in today, you're not going to starve, you're not going to go hungry, you're not going to be homeless, you're going to be okay. And even in the worst case scenario, you're going to learn so much, you're going to grow so much from the experience that the price is totally worth it. And I don't believe you will fail. I think you're going to have a tremendous experience wherever you go. Any good MBA program is going to take very good care of you, and you're going to be thrilled with the outcome in the end. So I think, go for it is probably my thing. I mean, for me, it was burn the ships. Here in Spain, there's a famous man, Cortez, who, when he got to Mexico, burned the ships. I sold my house, I sold my cars, I sold all of the things that I owned in the United States. Everything I own in the United States could fit in the back of a 4-door car today, and I don't regret it for 1 second. And so, I would say go big. Don't hesitate. Push for the best, and I think you'll be very, very happy.
Eddy, thank you so much for being on the Touch MBA podcast. I'm glad we made it happen.
Thank you, Darren, for having me. It was a delight.
Thanks for listening to the Touch MBA podcast. Don't be shy. We have a mailing list. Go to touchmba.com and get yourself signed up. And we'll keep you posted with the best tips and insider interviews on how to get into your number one school. You can also find us on Twitter and Facebook at Touch MBA. See you soon.